was almost 30 and female, and I have been told I look 16 to 18 depending on the outfit. I have an anxiety disorder, and additionally, I have issues picking up social cues, so sometimes I misunderstand things, or get paranoid about things that are really innocent, so I've learned to question my thoughts. I've been working in the food service industry for a few years, and in particular about 2 years at the Burger King this happened in. This incident happened about 4 years ago now. I had just started working some late night shifts, and we hired a new manager, Paul. He was a foot or so taller than me, skinny, with dark eyes, and usually wore large glasses. He wasn't physically imposing, but still made me nervous because he was new and male. There are reasons new males put me on edge, but that's for another day. After a few days, I noticed some strange things. Whenever I worked the counter, he would stand so close behind me that I could feel the cloth of his shirt brush my neck because he was looking over my shoulder. Again, I worked here before he did and had for a year, so it bugged me. If I was stuck in the drive-thru area instead, he would stand in such a way that I was blocked in and couldn't get past him, and every time I bent over, if I looked up, I could tell that he was staring right at me. At first I figured I was just imagining it, that he wasn't purposely blocking me in. I had to be just paranoid again, I assumed. After a few more weeks of working there, he started buying pizza for the crew, or drinks, etc. for a nearby business, and he always was the one to go pick it up and bring it in. I wouldn't eat anything unless the rest of the crew did, and I never drank anything I didn't get for myself, nor did I leave anything in the back office just in case, because I just felt something was wrong. I kept telling myself it's overreacting, you're fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling. One night I was told I had to do a late night shift. Just me, Paul, and Jack, someone that has worked there for a long time, and I trust him implicitly. Before the others left, I asked Jack to please keep an eye on Paul because he scared me. That night Paul asked me to clean the bathrooms, and I had no choice but to agree. To illustrate the layout to the bathrooms of the building, in order to get to the bathrooms from the main office, you go by the kitchen, around the corner, through a door, into an entryway. From there you open the men's room door, and from there is a back wall stall with a door. That's the stall I was in. So I'm there in the main men's stall, and Jack is in the kitchen as far as I know, with Paul in the office. As my back is turned, I hear the propped open men's room door shut. I turn around, and blocking my exit to the men's stall is Paul. Immediately I panic because that means that's 3 closed doors between me and Jack. Paul holds up a pair of drive-thru headgear and makes a comment like, "So I found these new ones in the office. Want to use them? I probably shouldn't give them to you, but I like you, so I figured why not?" I decline, and honestly I was shaking out of my shoes. Innocent as the dialogue was, he was looking me up and down the whole time, and it just felt creepy. He stood there about a foot away and just stared at me, not saying anything. And after a minute or so, Jack came in and said that there was a phone call and Paul had to come get it. Naturally, I booked it out of the bathroom and stuck myself to Jack, explaining that I was really scared and felt uncomfortable with the way Paul looked at me and the odd way he was behaving. Well, to me it was odd anyway, but again I felt like I was probably being paranoid. He told me he wouldn't let me out of his sight the rest of the night and that he was sorry that he had been distracted. He didn't like Paul either, and he kept good on his word. A few hours later, Paul says he's grabbing pizza and some soda from the place I mentioned earlier. When he came back, he called me to the back office and offered me a glass of soda, pre-poured. I said no thanks, I'm fine. Thinking to myself to the time that I'm being overly stupidly paranoid, but then again, why did he always bring soda? We had over 100 kinds on the premises. He asked me another 2 to 3 times if I was sure, and I again declined, Jack right beside me. Then Paul asked me if I had a boyfriend. I did, but I lied and said fiancé because I figured it maybe dissuaded any potential flirting. He says, "Fiancé? Aren't you a little young for that?" I don't know why, but I told him my age. He just kind of sat there and looked me up and down really slow. "Oh, I thought you were 16 or 17. From there, he left me pretty much alone. Believe it or not, 3 days later he was arrested because the place he worked for before, he had inappropriately touched an underage female coworker, threatened them, and told them he was a cop and so on and would arrest them if they told. Eventually, he was transferred from there to where I work, and we were never told anything till his arrest. He comes by twice since then, even though he's not allowed on the property because we have minors on site. I'm still freaked out, especially because the last time he came around, he came through the drive-thru where I was standing. So to Paul, I hope I never see you again, and you get exactly what you deserve. I was in high school at the time. I was babysitting my cousins one Friday evening. The young girls were about 3 and 5. Kim was 5 and Tabby was 3. I didn't mind. They were usually pretty easy to watch and it gave me extra cash. We spent most of our time in the computer room so that I could do some research for a project I needed to do for school. Kim and Tabby were playing with some dolls on the floor, but after some time they began telling me that they were hungry. I took them into the kitchen, placed Tabby in her booster seat to wait while I cooked. I made them nuggets, listened to both girls talk about silly kid stuff. I noticed that Tabby kept looking into her room, which was across from the kitchen. I shrugged it off at first, thinking that she was just being a kid, but she just kept looking. She kept staring into her room, and it looked as if though she was trying to look at something. I was starting to get a little freaked out. I turned off the oven and set their plates aside to cool, still watching Tabby carefully. "Sis, what are you looking at?" Kim asked impatiently. Tabby turned to her. "That." She pointed into her room, and I tried to follow her gaze, but from where I stood in the kitchen, I couldn't see that far into her room. Kim looked where she pointed, and a look of alarm crossed her features. I frowned. "What is it?" I asked, walking towards them. Kim turned to me. There were tears in her eyes. "There's a man in our room," she said in a whisper. She burst into tears. I didn't hesitate. I raced over and scooped Tabby out of her booster chair and took Kim's hand. I glanced at the room and saw a shadow slip into the closet. I didn't want to panic the girls. I didn't want to scare them any further, but I rushed them to the back bathroom and locked the door. I told them to stay quiet and to not say anything. I pulled out my phone, and my first instinct was to call my aunt and tell her what was going on, but I knew I better call the cops first. I did, and they informed me that someone was on their way. I turned around and called my aunt then too. She was thoroughly freaked out and said she'd be coming home soon. She thanked me for taking care of her girls. I was very freaked out, trying to calm the now crying Tabby and Kim. I think they were trying to be quiet, but I couldn't blame them for being scared. We waited in the bathroom until the police came. At one point I thought I heard a thump, but that could have been my imagination. The police arrived shortly after. Over the phone I had told them where we were hiding. There was a knock on the bathroom door and an officer called. "Rachel, it's Officer Reyes. Open the door and one of my buddies will escort you outside while we search the house. Your aunt is waiting outside." Relieved, I followed the officers outside with Tabby and Kim. It turned out that the guy in the room had already left. The bedroom window was wide open. I can't get over the fact that the guy had been so close, that we had been so close. I can't stop imagining what could have happened to my cousins, or me. My best friend growing up was named Sarah. From the ages of 8 to 23, we were inseparable. I might as well have lived with her most of my life. Sarah, her husband, and her baby, I will call her Bug, lived in a small house built in the early 1900s. It had 2 rooms at first, then was sloppily added onto until the early 70s. The kitchen and bathroom had 6-foot ceilings. The attic was stuffed to the rafters with straw when they first moved in, early insulation. They replaced it with fiberglass after finding this massive fire hazard that people had been living under for a century. When Bug was born, Sarah would often ask me to stay the night for various reasons. I loved my little Bug, so I had no problem sleeping on the couch and even getting up when she fussed. When Bug was around 3 months old, Sarah started to complain about sleep paralysis. This had never happened to her before. I asked her if she ever saw anything. The first was just pressure on her chest. The second time, she said a huge Jack Skellington-esque figure was standing on the edge of the bed. She described the figure as bony but colorless, a black mass absorbing all the light that surrounded it, but clearly dressed in a nice suit. Her voice was shaking when she told me about the third episode when she woke up. It was on top of her, breathing hot, moist nastiness into her face. She told me its breath smelled like rotten eggs and an old mildew wash rag. I knew this wasn't sleep paralysis then. I told her next time she was alone, she needed to demand the thing to stay out of her room. I should have said house, as it took to the attic, where it decided to make itself known by scattering straw along the whole attic floor. Sarah's husband made a fuss about it and refused to believe what was going on. All the straw had been removed months prior and someone was playing a joke on him. One night, I stayed after Sarah begged me, even bribed me with alcohol and breakfast. I sighed and took my place on the couch. Somewhere between episodes of The Golden Girls, I fell asleep. I woke up in that too comfortable to go pee state, so I lay there with my eyes closed until I had to go. When I opened my eyes, I saw what Sarah had been talking about. The figure filled the entire top half of the doorway. Half its head was hidden. I could feel it looking at me. I tried to lay still, tried not to blink. I could make out the edges of a nice suit. Its shoulders were pointy. Its torso was long and met a slender hip. Its legs seemed to seep into the floor. I don't know how long I looked at it or it at me. I blinked and the figure was gone. I slowly got up from the couch and tiptoed into the kitchen. I didn't know I was holding my breath until I sighed in the kitchen when I found nothing. I finally was able to relieve myself, but when I unlocked the door and turned the knob, it stopped halfway, like someone was holding the knob on the other side. I panicked like a coyote in a snare. I pulled the door with my whole might, even putting my foot on the door frame. The knob wouldn't budge in either direction. I slumped to the floor, still turning at the knob like a maniac on speed, still only getting a half turn. I was about to over-panic and start screaming when the knob finally turned and the door came open against my legs. I laughed nervously and opened the door. No one was there. Bug hadn't even budged, and I'm glad I didn't wake her in my state of blind horror. I sent Sarah a text and left her house at 3:30 a.m. I refused to stay in that house again. Come to find out, it had latched onto the negative marriage between Sarah and her husband, and has now moved to 2 different houses. In 2015, some life choices had led us in separate directions. I blame it on my hippie soul and her husband. I still wish Bug all the happiness in the world, and I hope she never has to fight any demons like that on her own. I grew up in a really safe neighborhood. My elementary school was 2 blocks away and another one 4 blocks away from the bridge down the street from my house. I could see my middle school from my house, which sat on the other side of the bayou. A Catholic, Methodist, Presbyterian, and my Lutheran church all sat neatly spaced out on the same road. The Catholic adjacent to my elementary school, the Methodist and Presbyterian across from my middle school, and my Lutheran church across from the neighborhood library. It's as middle class and safe as you can get. Not rich enough to be Stepford, but think Leave It to Beaver set in the late 90s. I wasn't a dumb kid, but I could be oblivious and naive. All kids whose ages are a single digit are. Because I had a tendency to tell my parents I was going to play with my friends at the park and then wander the neighborhood with them when we got bored. A lot of the times my mom would make my older sister walk me to and from the elementary school playground and soccer fields and park just to make sure I was with someone a little more cautious. My sister and I both hated it, but now I know it was for a good reason. One day, my sister and I are walking home. I don't even remember a whole lot of the day because it was just so ordinary. It was summer, hot, late afternoon, and I was bickering with my sister and sullen that she could boss me around. She was 11 and I was 8, and she was just as sullen that she had to babysit me. We were walking along the main road in our neighborhood, away from the school and towards our house. The road usually had cars parked along it, especially in front of the school, soccer fields, and park. Parents park in the street when the school parking lot fills up and wait for soccer practice to finish or their kids to see them from the park and know it's time to go home. Sometimes people cruise slowly down the street looking to see where their kids are and then drive off when they're sure little Jimmy isn't there. Not weird and not creepy when you live in Leave It to Beavertown. My sister and I had passed the soccer fields and were starting to pass by the park when my sister started nagging me to stay with her more than usual. I don't remember what I focused on. I guess I had my Game Boy or a book with me or something. I'd probably fallen behind on accident first, but kept walking slowly just to anger her when she snapped at me to keep up. I was vaguely away from a car slowly driving by us, but like I said, I figured they were looking for their kid. At one point, my sister turned to the car and asked the driver if they needed something. I finally looked up from whatever I was focused on and glanced over towards the driver. A middle-aged Indian woman was sitting there with her window rolled down and just staring at us. I only remember her because I thought she looked like my friend Gretchen's mom, but thinner and a little younger. She asked my sister if she knew where some street was. My sister shook her head and said no. She asked if the lady was looking for her kid, and the lady said no. My sister said okay and kept walking, telling me to hurry up. I followed her and went back to what I had been doing before. After 30 seconds, my sister stopped and bent down to mess with her shoe. I looked around and noticed the lady was still even with us and had stopped too. She was still staring at us. I was too naive to be scared. I just thought the lady was weird. But my sister noticed all of this and grabbed my hand and dragged me off the sidewalk and into the park, cutting through it to get away from the street and the lady that wasn't even using her gas pedal to roll along, and kept up with 2 children walking home. My sister loudly said, "Let's take the shortcut home or we'll be late." I was really confused and really dumb and said this wasn't a shortcut. It was a longer route, and we weren't going to be late anyways. My sister snapped at me to shut up until we were on the other side of the park. When she finally dropped my hand, she looked back and pointed out that the lady was still there, window still rolled down, still watching us. We were the only people in the park. My sister told me that the lady was being really weird and was probably trying to kidnap us or something. I didn't want to admit that my sister was being responsible, so I just told her she was stupid and we went on home. My sister told my mom as soon as we got home, and I remember making fun of her because she was scared from all those PG-13 and R-rated movies she and her friends would watch together in secret. I thought I'd get her in trouble, but my mom actually looked really scared and called my dad in and made my sister tell him everything. My dad left the room to go call someone, police probably, and the neighborhood phone tree, and my mom sat me down and gave me the "If you see adults acting weird around you or they try to get you to go with them, yell that you don't know them and you need help and run away" talk. I can remember bits and pieces of this. It was weird but boring thing that happened. I remember the lady only because of how she looked like a friend's mom, and I remember bickering with my sister and her weird behavior, and I remember the reactions of my parents and feeling like I'd gotten in trouble. The rest my sister filled in for me. She told me later that she asked all her friends if they had seen the lady, that my dad went out and talked to all the neighbors to see if they'd ever seen the woman, and that police cruised the neighborhood every day for a while after that. I never saw the lady again. Gretchen and her family were out of the country visiting family, and no one seemed to know anything about this lady. It's a memory that still scares my sister, especially now that she has her own kid, even though she lives in a safe, tight-knit community of her own. I still don't know what to think about it. I'd like to think that she was just lost and needed help, but didn't know how to ask 2 young kids. Maybe she was hoping to follow us until we would lead her someplace familiar to her. Maybe she wasn't trying to kidnap us at all. But then, I don't know how to explain why she'd have her window rolled down in the height of Texas summer heat and keep following us when we didn't know where she was looking to go, her car slowly rolling forward, always staring at us as we escaped across the park. So this happened about a year and a half ago when I was around 13 or 14. I'm a female, and at the time I was in 8th grade. My entire class in middle school was very small, only around 60 to 65 kids every year, so all of us knew each other very well. Although my school is a private school, I'm now an upperclassman, so I still go there. I live in one of the most dangerous states in the nation, and things tend to be sketchy all around, not excluding the majority of the students who go there. I have a lot of stories about so many kids in my grade doing sketchy and disturbing things to other people, which I may get to putting up sometime in the future, and, of course, that's where the story begins. There was this kid in my class who always acted weird on purpose to freak people out and make them uncomfortable, most likely for attention. He would say creepy things and make jokes to all the girls in our class, and even threatened to do things to one of my friends. I'll call her Jenny. Jenny had told me and all of her friends about how he had harassed her and threatened to hurt her at her house, but then played it off as a joke and proceeded to talk to her normally as if they were friends. He got reported for it immediately and was put on behavioral probation for 2 weeks, which honestly isn't enough time for the things he said to her. He said other things to other girls too, mostly about things I don't even want to mention that are completely inappropriate to talk about, especially in a school environment. He also tends to act as if he's dumb, like he's a child or something, when he has clearly acted his age in the past with teachers and guy friends. Overall, he oversteps boundaries so often that, at this point, most of the girls in our grade know to stay away from him. But on one fatefully unlucky day, my worst encounter with him began. I had to be picked up after school by my mom, who works a 9-to-5 job all over the city. She works in hospice and has patients all around, so I would never know exactly where she'd be coming from to pick me up. Today she was coming from a town bordering ours that was over an hour away, and then had to stop at her office to do paperwork, so I had to entertain myself at least until 5:30 when she would come get me. The way our pickup line works is there is a sidewalk against the main school building where most of the kids wait for their parents to pick them up. There's only one bench and it's near the door to the building, so most of us just sit on the sidewalk with our backs against the wall, looking out into the street with friends, which is where I was. Since my mom was going to be 2 hours late picking me up, I was practically the last person there. I'll accept that boy, who I'll call Nate for the sake of the story. For around an hour he sat a few meters to my left and generally didn't bug me, until we were both alone on the sidewalk. Then he started to try and strike up a conversation with me. At first it was fine. He started asking me questions like what I was doing on my phone, and I would give him one-word answers, all with my earbuds in. But with every question, he would come a little closer to me, until he full-on moved all his belongings next to me and was touching me. At multiple occasions I asked him to leave, each time him being childish and annoying, asking why, and when I would tell him exactly why I wanted him to leave, he would divert the conversation to something perverted. He started asking more personal questions and getting creepier as he went along. Things like, "Do you know what it's like to have a good time? Can girls do it when they're on that time of the month?" At this point, I had determined to completely ignore his gross questions and ask him to go away more firmly, but he wouldn't budge. He started getting closer and closer to me, looking over my shoulder to look at my phone and putting his face close to mine and pressing his body into my leg. I contemplated getting up to leave, but my phone was about to die and I needed to know when my mom would get there. That, and I knew that Nate would follow me wherever I went. He started to put his hand on my knees and shoulders, and even when I asked him to stop, he would just play dumb and ask why until I pushed him off of me. I asked him multiple times not to touch me, and he would do that same stupid game where he would hover his finger next to my leg and say, "I'm not touching you." I was extremely annoyed, and he continued to get more invasive. As he kept getting closer to me, his questions started escalating more and more. "Do you know what assault is?" "Go away, Nate. I don't want to talk to you." "Do you? Do you know what it is?" "Buzz off, Nate." I started hitting him where he was touching my knee. "Do you know that Jenny forced herself on me?" forced me to do it with her. I looked at him dumbfounded. At that point, I was done. His hand was still on my knee, so I hit his arm. Not as hard as I could have, but hard enough to get him to stop touching me. I turned my body to look at him and screamed at him, pointing at him and slapping his arm. "Stop touching me, Nate! I'm sick of you! If you touch me again, I'm going to punch you and I'll tell the dean all the things you've said to me. Now go away." He looked shaken for only a second before he fake frowned and looked at me as if though I was the one who'd started it. He started talking in a baby voice, mocking me. "Oh, I'm going to tell the dean on you." He was acting as if though he did nothing to make me mad or uncomfortable, and that really pushed my buttons. He kept talking to me and looking over my shoulder for the next 5 minutes until his mom showed up, and then got up and hovered around me for a few seconds. Then, as he was leaving, he said goodbye to me and waved as if though nothing even happened. At this point, I was so shaken and angry that I couldn't react anymore. I felt like crying, and I felt so violated and disgusted that I couldn't do anything but sit there. I did not tell anyone but my friends about what happened, and to this day I regret not doing anything. I have this intense fear of being assaulted, as any woman does, but this kid who was younger than me had just invaded my safety, and I didn't try hard enough to get him to stop. I sent all the signals that I didn't want to talk to him and that I didn't want to talk or interact at all, and the whole encounter almost sent me to tears. It's a shame that I even have this story to tell, or that I even had to try harder than a simple go away to get him to leave. Sadly, Nate still goes to my school, and after that experience, I began hating him. I left out a few of the other things he said to me because I can't remember specifics, and I have lots of trouble with long-term memory in general, but this still stuck in my mind. This goes out as a warning and a message to all my fellow girls and guys out there. If someone is doing something that is making you uncomfortable, do not hesitate to do what you can to get them to stop. I regret not doing more and not telling the authorities at my school because he has continued to do these types of things throughout the years. Luckily, he has gotten in deeper trouble for different things and has stopped doing such intense things to other people. I have many more stories about people from my school, as I said before, but for now, I hope no other girl at my school has to experience the same thing I did. I'm telling you this story 3 years after the incident took place. At the time, I was a 15-year-old boy and was home alone for the night with my dog, which was a beagle named Dodger. I was in the room with my dog and was playing some games with my friends like teenage boys do. My parents had gone out for the night to go to my father's friend's birthday. I was used to being home alone at night because I am an only child and my parents go out a lot during the night and day. It was about 11 p.m. when I decided I was going to take a break and shower and watch TV for a little while. I'm quite the active person after all. When I got out of the shower, I went downstairs to make some popcorn and watch The Office, when I heard a large group of people sort of yell, talking to each other. This wasn't new to me as I lived just down the street from a bar and it happens almost every night. When they walked in front of my house, my dog started barking at them like dogs do. Suddenly there was silence outside and I was a little startled for a second. Then I looked out the window to see them eyeing my house down and looking right at me and my dog. I didn't know what to do at this point, so I turned off my TV and ran in my room with my dog. I go to look out the window in my room to see that they had gone. I was relieved for a moment until I heard a shattering come from downstairs. I left my dog in my room and grabbed my baseball bat since I played when I was younger. I crept down my stairs just enough to see the living room, and I saw one of the men peering through the window that they had broken. I yelled down at him that I had my father's gun. He doesn't own one, but I had to try something, and to my surprise, they yelled back that they had a gun too of their own. I was frozen at this point and didn't know what to do yet again. I ran back to my room and called the police, probably something I should have done long before that. 2 minutes passed and I hear nothing downstairs, so I go to investigate. I see the glass of the window was now completely out of frame, leading me to believe that they had climbed through. Luckily, the police showed up within the next 45 or so seconds, and when they searched my home, They said they found nothing had been taken. They searched the surrounding area, and they were not found anywhere. I have since gone to college and moved out, but I will never forget that night. I guess I should consider myself lucky, but I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't called the police. My name is Tatiana, and my story takes place during my freshman year of high school while I was on winter break. Before I begin my story, let me clarify my living situation. When I was younger, my mother and father separated, so my father moved in with his parents, and years later, my mother passed away when I was around the age of 6, and my little brother was 4. This caused me to move in with my grandparents and father. Fast forward to December 2017. My aunt and uncle and 2 younger cousins live in another state, and every year they visit my grandma during summer vacation and Christmas. My uncle only visits in the winter, however, because we don't have the best AC. Anyways, the trip started out normal, and we were all excited to see each other again, and the same goes on for a few days. Then, on about the 4th day, I got a weird vibe from my uncle when my older cousin told me that my uncle went up to her and said, "You looking hot today, babe." Not pretty, not beautiful, hot. She told me that she felt sort of uncomfortable around him, but I thought that maybe she was just exaggerating. I later believed her when it was just me and my uncle home alone while I was sitting in the living room on my phone, when he laid his arm on my shoulder, sort of pushing it down, leaned in and whispered in my ear, "You look very beautiful today." The statement alone didn't bother me. It was just the way he expressed it, and made me realize what my cousin had told me was true. For the rest of the week, I didn't want to be alone around him anymore. I always tried to have someone else in the room, but he would still do little things like grab my shoulders or touch me in areas near my chest, even with others around. I sometimes felt afraid to fall asleep with him in the room because he, my grandmother, and I were sleeping downstairs together while the others took the upstairs. One day I was upstairs in my room collecting my little cousin's pajamas because I would help take care of them while they were over. My uncle came into the room to thank me for helping out. I wasn't bothered by this until he slid a $5 bill up my sleeve and accidentally touched my chest and just walked away. I felt disgusted, but at the same time I was able to laugh it off, telling myself that he acted like I was some sort of dancer by putting money in my clothes. That aside, I was still disturbed. The last incident I recall occurred while my grandma, aunt, uncle, and cousins were in the room. I was opening a kitchen door and he was trying to move past me. He could have excused himself so I would let him through, but instead he grabbed me by the hips and thrust it into me from behind and stayed there for a good 10 seconds and said, "Excuse me, babe." The day they left could not have come sooner. We said our goodbyes. I got an uncomfortable hug from my uncle, and they were off. It's currently the end of August, and I start school soon, which means before I know it, my cousin and I will have to get through another visit with him. If he's willing to do all of that, I'm afraid to know what else he's capable of, or having to find out the hard way. This happened when I was a kid, I would say about 6 years old. Because it happened so long ago, parts of the story are from my mom's experience, as well as my own because I can't fully remember all of it. So the way my house is set up, our front door leads into the gaming room. We use the back door because we have furniture blocking the front door. My house is also located on a dead-end road, so when someone knocks at the front door, automatically it sets off red flags as neighbors, friends, and family know to knock on the back door. I remember it was a Saturday around 10 a.m., so I didn't have to go to school, and I was spending my morning playing with my Barbie dolls in the living room, which is right next to the gaming room. I kept playing until I heard a knock at the front door. Being the naive little 6-year-old girl I was, I figured it was a friend of my mom's. As I had previously mentioned, we kept furniture in the gaming room and it blocked off the front door. Because of this, I ran upstairs to the balcony, in which you could see the front door. I leaned over the balcony rail and saw a man. He was wearing an orange t-shirt and dirty, baggy jeans. Altogether, he didn't look very clean. His hair was dirty as well as his face. He looked up at me and smiled. "Hi, doll," he yelled at me, all the while waving. "Hi," I said, smiling back, forgetting completely about the stranger danger rule. He looked around my yard, noticing that there were no cars around. I guess because of this he assumed I was home alone, but my mom was actually in the bathroom taking a shower. "Doll, are your parents home?" He had a wide grin on his face, almost like how a kid looks before they get a new toy. The grin was filled with excitement. "Yeah, my mommy is." These words made his excited face drop into a frown. "Can you go get your mommy for me?" His tone was different, more angry. I nodded and ran into the bathroom. My mom was brushing her wet hair and smiled at me. "Mommy, there's a man in our yard who wants to talk to you." Her smile went away and she immediately told me to go to the room while she handled it. She went outside and came back in about 20 minutes later. I asked her a few years later whatever happened that day, and she told me the rest of the story. According to my mother, she went outside and greeted the man. See, my mother is easily set on edge. Because of this, she immediately asked why he was bothering us. He responded by explaining that he was a part of a construction company. My mom couldn't remember the name, but she knew she had never heard of it. While he said this, he pointed to the name tag, which was written in crayon, which said the company's name. He explained there was construction going on in another county and wanted to let us know. This county was 2 hours away, so there was no need to tell us. He then began asking my mom to come in the house. Of course she said no, that there was no point for him to come in, but he wouldn't drop it. He kept asking her, saying he only wanted to see the interior design of the house as it was so beautiful from the front. He then began to push past her, trying to get to the back of the house for a way to enter. My mom pulled him back and told him that he needed to leave right then and there. With that, he got in his truck and left, and that was the last we saw of him, until my mom got a phone call that night. She answered, but all that could be heard was heavy breathing. Now we don't know if that person that called was him, but it honestly was really creepy. During my elementary years, I went to a school that was situated on top of a hill. It's the only building there, and next to it is a convent for nuns who run the school and a cemetery. Since the location is very secluded, we heard lots of tales about possible souls from the cemetery passing by the school grounds. When I was in the 5th grade, my class starts at 7 a.m., but I usually come in around 6 a.m. because I share a ride with my cousins who went to a different school, but will take the same route as mine. One day, my cousins have to leave early, so I came to the school at 5 a.m. It was still dark during that time. The guard already left the school's gate open for me as he knows that I always come early. When you enter the school gate, you will see a basketball court and rows of classrooms facing the court. On the side of the classrooms is a corridor leading up to the next level of classrooms. You go further down and you get to the school's auditorium. My classroom is in the basement area. You have to pass the auditorium for you to get to the stairway down to the basement. I know, it's weird. While I was on the stairway on my way down to the auditorium, from there I can see the empty stage and the big empty hall. No one is around. I'm the only one in the school, aside from the guard at that time. I continued walking, and as soon as I stepped into the auditorium, I can hear a girl singing. At first it was very soft. I can barely make out the words. I looked around, but I can't see anyone. The girl's singing became louder and louder. As it gets louder, the notes go higher and higher. She's now singing as if though she's holding a microphone. I was stunned. I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. It's impossible. There's no mic on the stage, and the guard confirmed that I'm the first one to come in. Not even the teachers are in the school yet. As the singing gets louder and higher, I see a white light in front of me. It slowly moves towards me, like a train that's ready to hit me. I couldn't move. I was mesmerized by the white light. Suddenly, I heard someone calling my name. The light is gone. The singing is gone. I can see that I'm now standing in the middle of the auditorium. I look back at the stairway, and there I see my classmates looking at me. They told me that they've been calling me several times, but I am not responding. The sun is already up and it's already 6. I've been standing there for an hour. I asked my classmates if they had heard anyone singing and they said no. After a few hours, I did some research on my experience and what happened to me in the 5th grade. I read that if you see a light coming closer to you, it means that a spirit is trying to take over your body. I'm glad my classmates came in on time to prevent that from happening. As I've mentioned in previous posts, I tend to be verbally aggressive, confrontational, and basically I don't shy away from a fight if I feel the person has wronged me somehow. I have yet to get into an actual physical situation, so I digress. I doubt I do well in an actual fight. My bravado usually seems to scare people off. I've also mentioned in passing my sexuality, which is garnered towards the same sex, female if you have to know. Dating hasn't always been my thing. In fact, I've gone on the most dates this last year, out of my 2 short decades of existence. I met this one girl on OkCupid, and before you start thinking, no, it doesn't go awry, we actually hit it off on our first date and ended up spending a few extra hours together before I went home, and then we ended up going on 2 more. So, needless to say, I am no longer a fish available to catch. For a little more context before I get into this, I don't live in the city where this takes place. Well, I do live there for 8 months at a time. I'm a university student, and in some Facebook photos I have, there's evidence of my school logo. My girlfriend, M for the story, had a daughter with her boyfriend, but he's no longer in a relationship with her. So she's a single mom living in an apartment complex in the middle of the city, and it's where we're going to establish. And while this story affected her the most, it's now affecting me too. Nutty is who the story's about, my nickname for her, and overall description of this girl. You see, Nutty and M worked together at a Wendy's years prior to meeting me. M always had a thing for girls who were quirky and a little alternative. She's also got a big heart, so when Nutty asked her out, she couldn't turn her down. M and Nutty dated for 4 months, but it wasn't long, of course, before the warning signs appeared. Nutty is mentally unstable, and while I get that, hey, I know where she's coming from. It's not an excuse for the actions I'm about to describe. She's also refused any sort of therapy or assistance, and her family has decided not to help her. So you've got a non-medicated, undiagnosed ball of mania that you're dating, essentially. Now what could possibly go wrong with that? Warning sign number 1. Nutty mentions that she wishes M's ex-boyfriend was dead. It's one of those, well okay then, thing you can normally brush aside. Where you can't is when someone starts saying it over and over. M's ex wasn't abusive. He's actually a really great guy by conversation. The whole reason they broke up was because she figured out she liked girls. So Nutty continuously says, I want to kill him, and things revolving around that train of thought. Warning sign number 2. Nutty is pushy and aggressive. Where I'm aggressive is that if I think someone has done myself or another person injustice, I'm quick to respond verbally or with a short charge at them. Where Nutty is aggressive is that she got very upset if she didn't get her way, or was quick to become threatening of a person. She continuously pushed M to hang out, to come over, to go on a date, and to even go further than that. She wouldn't stop until she got her way, not caring that her girlfriend didn't always want to do those things or hang out with her, which brings me to warning sign number 3. Nutty is clingy. She would call M at all hours to do one or more, message her on Facebook, and basically stalked her social medias to see what she was up to. She didn't like M going to things without her, getting mad and insulting M's friends and family. The 2 major events that led up to their breakup shows also how messed up Nutty is. Nutty tricked M's daughter into telling her when her mother was home this one time she called. M was in the shower, her daughter answered it, and because she knew Nutty, she told the stalker exactly where her mom was. So Nutty shows up, comes into M's apartment, lying and saying she forgot something there. When she and M were alone, Nutty proceeded to attack M, and she didn't beat her, if you catch my drift. Of course, the cops in our city don't get it yet, that assault perpetrated by a woman against a woman is actually feasible. So guess what? Nothing was done. The boneheaded morons decided to just charge Nutty for trespassing, and she got a fine. I, for one, no longer trust the police after learning this. Event number 2 occurred after, when Em of course broke up with her. Nutty went ballistic. She threatened to end herself and that it would be Em's fault. She took a video of herself swallowing a ton of sleeping pills and sent it to Em, claiming it was her fault she was doing this. Em of course called the cops, but yes, you guessed it, nothing. They honestly didn't take that seriously either. It's appalling what law enforcement thinks is necessary around there. In all honesty, I think they were mostly corrupted. Nonetheless, Nutty didn't end herself. She threw up the pills, apparently after taking the video, and then waited until the next day. She then contacted Em pretending to be her mother and told Em that she was to blame for her daughter's death. Well, needless to say, Em didn't buy it for a minute. She called out Nutty's bullcrap and Nutty came clean. Promptly afterwards, Em blocked her on everything. Why she hadn't earlier, I don't know, and quit her job at Wendy's. 6 months later, after a new position at a Starbucks and deciding to try dating one more time, we met, which brings me full circle to recent events. I'm away from the city in the small town I'm originally from, working my butt off so I can at least afford groceries for the next 8 months. I'll be an unemployed student. Em and I have been in contact the last 4, chatting and planning out a big date for the weekend I get back. Em and I have been in contact, chatting and planning out a big date for the weekend I get back. Em contacted me out of the blue after a couple of days of radio silence. She told me that Nutty had come into her work when she wasn't around, asking another employee about her. She figured out where Em was working and claimed to be an old friend. The idiot blabbed, telling Nutty all about Em and, yup, me. So Nutty is angry. She gets a new number and account, contacting Em and threatening to cut me if she sees me. Nutty also found my Facebook. I've since switched it to private, and now knows where I'm going to university. Due to me also being an idiot and leaving the photos with my uni's logo up, I got a threatening message from her a few weeks ago, saying that when I'm found, I'm going to pay for messing with what's hers. The silver lining in all of this is that she thankfully doesn't know where I live. I've actually kept that off my profile. I also don't link any of my other social media platforms to my Facebook, so she has no way of cyberstalking me. I just blocked her on Facebook after getting that message. The bad news is that she knows where I'm going to school and that I live in the dormitories. Emma's worried about me. She isn't sure if Nutty would actually be bold enough to come onto the campus to try and find me. Reading all of your stories and listening to narrations of them has inspired me to take the next steps. As soon as move-in day arrives and I'm back in the city, I'll tell the university what's going on. I'll make sure my new dormitory mates know who Nutty is and to not answer our security door for any reason or whoever asks for me. Since concealed weapons like pepper spray guns and tasers and knives aren't allowed, I'll keep my alarm box on me. Em is also taking precautions which I will only say involves keeping one of the above concealed weapons illegally. So to wrap this up, 2 weeks ago I get a message from an unlisted account, and it was, you guessed it, Nutty herself. She said some pretty violent, threatening stuff that I don't think anyone wants to read. I reported and blocked her, not responding with anything, and I've informed my RC of the situation, and the campus is now on the lookout in case she pops up. Still, I have a couple of weeks left, so for now I'm in no real danger. I may never be, but I'm not pressing my luck pretending nothing might happen. I'll update if there's any more developments. I awoke, my vision blurry. The room around me was dark and the only source of light seemed to be a lone candle upon the dark mahogany table in front of me. I was strapped to my seat and couldn't move. There was one other chair to my left with no one in it. There was no light and simply one door across from me. I yelled out for help but received no response. I shuffled in my chair hoping it might move or better yet topple over. It stood fast and I realized I was stuck there. I called out again with panic growing in my voice. "Hello? Is anyone here?" After a few minutes I heard a muffled voice finally respond. "Just a moment, my dear. Dinner is almost ready." the person said. The voice sounded male, but I could tell little else about him. I could only sit and wonder what he meant by dinner. I also could not recall how I came to be here. All I knew was my head was pounding, and the last thing that I remember was having drinks with my friends for girls' night. I had not been out of the house since my mother passed away last month, and they all agreed I needed to get out of my head for a little while. At that particular moment, all I wanted was to get out of that chair. I tried moving again, and a pain pulsed from under my legs. I cringed as it shot up my thigh. I tried to lean back and see what the cause of my suffering could be, but it was no use. I was bound too tightly to my seat. I cried out for help again, but my pleas were cut short as the door swung open and light filled the room. A tall, pale man stepped out from what appears to be a kitchen. The fluorescence behind him blinded me from his appearance to begin with, but he soon stepped in to allow the door to close. "Ah, you're awake. Good. I will bring you some wine," the man said. His black hair had been slicked back, and he wore a white double-breasted jacket with an apron wrapped around his waist. It appeared I would be the unwilling guest of Chef Crazy. He disappeared again into the kitchen, only to return a few moments later with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He set them adjacent to one another and filled them carefully. Then he lifted the bottles slightly and turned the label toward me. "This is Pinot Noir, 1956. It will pair well with our meal, and I hope you enjoy them both." A smile curled behind his words. He looking down at my secured frame, then he tapped his palm against his head, as if he could have forgotten, before stating, "Silly me, you will need help with your drink." He picked up the glass and brought it to my lips. I turned my face away and stared intently at him from my peripheral. I growled at him. "What is this?" He set the glass down and wiped his hands on a small black and white hand towel that rested at his hip. He gave a disappointed sigh while leaning down. I felt his fingers brush against my cheek, but I quickly pulled away. "You see, I do enjoy cooking. I always have, but I am told I am not very good at it," he said while emoting with his hands. "I usually stick to the simple recipes, and I am working on perfecting them. I know you want to know what we are having, but you have to be patient. I would really hate to ruin the surprise." The words fell from his lips easily, and as soon as they were done, he turned to walk away. The whole thing unnerved me. He sounded too comfortable and must have done this all before. Before I could speak again, he had faded into the kitchen. I began looking around the room for any possible means of escape, but all I could see was the table set and the candle. There were 2 windows, but large crimson curtains covered them and let no light through. I tried to move the chair once more, and again I felt pain pulse through my lower body. The chair wasn't moving, and I couldn't stand trying to make it. My chest became tight, and I felt as though I might hyperventilate. I could barely contain the feeling of desperation. I could feel the warmth of teardrops cascading down my cheeks. I had been with my friends all night. I never took a drink from a stranger. I must have been drugged, but I have no idea how or when it had occurred. I had only had 2 cosmopolitans that I could remember. My internal conversation was interrupted by a smell wafting through the air. It was familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. My captor arrived again, pushing a service cart with a silver tray that was covered. He moved the tray from the cart to the table before pushing the cart to the side. His hand reached for the covering, lifting it quickly and shouting in a fake Italian accent, "Voila!" The sudden noise made me jump. My eyes shifted to the dish that revealed pale, winding noodles knotted into a pile with red chunky sauce that included ground meat. I had been abducted to have a spaghetti dinner with this psycho. I looked at him. My eyes furrowed and narrowed. He was giving me the cheesiest grin I had ever seen. He truly looked pleased with himself. "I hope you like it," he beamed. "It's my best dish." I don't know what made this man think I would be putting anything he brought me into my mouth, but within moments, he was wrapping strands of pasta around a fork and guiding it toward me. I turned away again before speaking. "I'm not eating that!" I quickly closed my lips together and cut my eyes at him. He lowered the fork and his smile faded. "I think you would like it if you tried," he murmured. "It's good, I promise. If you don't believe me..." He paused and pushed the fork into his mouth. He chewed for a moment before speaking again. "See? Delicious." He scooped more onto the fork and twisted the strings around again and leaned toward me. "No!" I yelled. "Just get me out of this chair and get me out of this place." The fork was set upon the plate and his hands rested on his hips. "How about this?" he mused. "If you would take a few bites of my pasta, I will let you up from the chair." His tone raised to signify a question along with his eyebrows. I thought for a moment as my eyes turned toward him. I had no real way to make him let me go, and maybe this was my only way out. I just wasn't sure if I should, because he ate it doesn't mean something might not be wrong with it. Even something as simple as him not washing his hands could make me sick. How well was the meat cooked? I could get E. coli or salmonella. He had said earlier he was a bad cook. I could be allergic to something in it. I didn't even know what was in it. "Well?" He interrupted my thought process, his voice growing more annoyed. "Fine," I said with a sigh of defeat. I had given in and I could only hope that this wouldn't be my last meal. He clapped his hands together and gave a little giggle before turning to grab the fork again. The sauce dribbled from the thin strands of pasta as it came closer. Just the sight of it in his hands made my stomach turn a little. I opened my mouth slightly and he placed the portion within. I closed my mouth and eyes at the same time and prayed to myself. It rolled about between my teeth for a moment, and when I opened my eyes, he was giving me that stupid grin again. Surprisingly, the food was good. Really good, as a matter of fact. I chewed every bit and gave a gulping swallow. My eyes probably gave away my enjoyment, and he went for another forkful. He brought it quickly and pressed it toward my face. I hesitated, but this honestly was the best spaghetti I'd ever eaten. After I had consumed half the plate, I finally remembered that the whole point was to taste it in order to be set free. "Okay, it was good, but I really like to be out of this chair now." I gave him a stern tone. He frowned a little bit but set the fork back down. "All right, a deal is a deal," his voice sounding disappointed. He approached and removed the straps holding my upper body to the back of the chair, then knelt down to release my legs. A sound of metal clanking was heard. I could only assume he was unfastening whatever held the chair in place first. Then I could feel his hand brush against my thigh as the binding across my legs was loosened and allowed to fall to the side. As soon as I was free, I attempted to stand up. Hot, searing pain echoed up from my legs to my spine, and now that I was loose, I could move back enough to see why. Long strips of skin and muscle had been removed from my thigh region and been covered slightly with bandages. The cloth had been soaked through with my blood, but I could tell that this wound was deep. "I'm sorry," he frowned. "The numbness will wear off in a few hours. I accidentally used too much anesthetic. I have always been bad with measurements." My body shook and tears rolled down my face. I touched at the bandages, my legs not wanting to move. I found myself spouting anything that came to my mind. "Why? What is this? Who are you? Oh God, my legs!" The man simply dried his hands on the towel again and watched me, his face expressionless. When I noticed him staring at me, I leaned forward, and the words came out. "What have you done to me?" He stepped forward and picked up the plate. He began taking bites of it. "I told you, I had been trying to perfect my cooking." The words were slightly garbled since he was spurting them through mouthfuls of pasta. Then a thought crept into my head. The entire time I had been devouring the delicacy, I had not even let myself consider that it hadn't smelled like any spaghetti I had ever had, and definitely didn't taste the same. My eyes slowly widened, and I could feel vomit rising up my throat. I hunched over, and the rancid dinner splattered across the floor. The man jumped back from the mess quickly and sat the plate on the cart. Did my spaghetti not agree with your stomach? He asked as he rushed to wipe the remnants off my face. Don't worry, there is plenty more, and since you won't be going anywhere anytime soon, why not have a few more bites? The question came with that same sick smile. I spat at him and tumbled on the floor. My body screamed at me as I slammed hard onto the wooden floor. I cried out before yelling, "No! I'm getting out of here! I'm going home, and you're done!" He smiled at me and came closer. He picked up the chair and placed it at the table, then leaned over to try to help me up, but I refused. He shook his head and leaned closer. The deal was I would let you out of the chair. I never said anything about letting you go. I leaned back and turned for the kitchen. My breath held tight in my mouth at the thought of being trapped here with this man. As he passed through the kitchen door, I began to crawl toward it after him. The wood splintered into my knees and my muscles cried for me to stop. The door shut in front of me, and when I reached out to press upon it, I heard the distinctive sound of metal sliding upon metal. He had engaged the lock, and when I touched the wooden entry, it didn't budge. I was trapped again, and when I turned back to look at the window, I heard the man speak once again. Don't bother with the windows. They have been barred shut. You might as well sit back down at the table and finish your food. That was a week ago. As I finished my story, the detective sat scribbling notes in a pad as he sat next to my hospital bed. I lay there covered from the neck down in bandages. The pen stopped moving long enough for him to ask, "So, how did you escape?" He took a little from me each night, and I thought I was going to die. I lost consciousness, and when I woke up, I had been dropped off here. I tried to move my hand when speaking, but it hurt too much. He asked if I could remember where I was, and I simply shook my head. I had been unconscious both coming and going from the place. Nothing about the room or the kitchen looked familiar. I know I wasn't being much help. Why do you think he let you go then? He looked down and started writing again as he questioned. I thought to myself for a moment and said the only thing I could possibly think of. He needed fresh meat. Many places have what's called a ghost tour, where you go around a town and stop at locations that are supposedly haunted. Of course, being around Halloween, I was really excited to go on a tour of a city I didn't know much about. The city has the nickname of the Halloween capital of the world, which I thought was just a title until what happened during the tour. We started out at about 10 p.m. For the first couple of places, nothing really happened until we got to a house where a doorbell had been known to ring by itself. This house is very old, and you have to really work to ring the bell, and there is no way the wind could press the bell. When we were done at the house and started to walk away, the doorbell rang. No one was near the door as we were all walking away, and were about 10 feet from the door. A while later, the tour was close to an end when we stopped at this cement coin in the middle of the sidewalk. The tour guide was talking about the history of it when, all of a sudden, my hair was pulled so hard that my head tilted backwards and my eyes started to tear up because it hurt so bad. On the way home, my family and I are talking about the tour when I asked if anyone else had their hair pulled or experienced anything else, but I was the only one. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.